I'm so sorry. There's nothing I can do about it. Right now, sister-in-law is standing before me, offering a heartfelt apology. How did this all happen? Well, the story goes back about a week. My name is Clara. My husband runs a hot dog stand. His name is Osamand. We met at the hot dog stand my husband used to run. He owned a small hot dog stand near the train station, right on my way home from work. I would get hungry after work and often buy a hot dog there. He initiated a conversation, and we started dating. After a few years of dating, we got married. The first time I met sister-in-law, who is now apologizing deeply in front of me, was at a family meeting. Nice to meet you. I'm dating brother. Please treat me well. Nice to meet you. I'm not perfect, but I'm sister, so please be kind. At that time, I thought a nice person had come into our lives. Brother runs a reasonably large company, and sister-in-law is the one who supported him, so he said. He spoke highly of her, calling her a solid and good wife. But a few years after brother got married, sister-in-law's true nature began to show. Every time she came to visit her parents' house, she had more designer items, and her social media was filled with photos of luxury hotel lunches with friends and designer cosmetics. We let it go as long as it didn't affect us, but eventually, sister-in-law began to demand persistent comments. Sister-in-law, why don't you comment on my social media? I only browse. Don't you have any pictures to post? No, I use social media to gather information and look at others' posts. Wouldn't it be nice to comment once in a while? Maybe if I feel like it. Please comment at least once. I'm not doing it just because you tell me to. I was annoyed with her constant requests for comments, so I started ignoring her for a while. Then, she said in a small voice, "You're such a buzzkill. Boring." From that moment on, I decided to avoid sister-in-law more than necessary. I wanted her to understand that I wasn't the type to get overly friendly, but she was thick-skinned and kept asking for comments several times afterward. Ignoring her each time, she finally gave up on the comments. Since we rarely met, I thought I could spend my time comfortably, but whenever I went back to my parents' house, our schedules would coincide, making me feel depressed every time. It happened again during my recent visit home. Sister-in-law, what do you think of this bag? It's cute, isn't it? It's a brand new collection. I'm not interested in that sort of thing. Come on now, every girl loves brand name bags, don't they? I genuinely had no interest in brands or expensive accessories, but it seemed to have struck a nerve with her that I wasn't envious. She said, "You don't have to pretend. If you're jealous, just admit it. I can even give you my old one." I was actually disinterested and annoyed, so I replied, "I really have no interest. Besides, I think those things are best left to those who like them. What's your problem? Stop being so stubborn." She snapped and left without waiting for my brother to return. When brother got home, I protested because I thought her behavior was too much. "Hey, can you do something about your wife?" "What happened?" "She made a comment that clearly looked down on me earlier, and it made me really uncomfortable." "What do you mean?" I told him all about her constant nagging for compliments and her condescending remarks, like offering to give me her old things. Recently, she's been treated like a CEO's wife by her housewife friends, and I think it's gotten to her head. I'll have a firm talk with her too, but I'd like you to handle it smoothly. I don't want to fight either, but I don't feel like we can be friends. Just remember to keep our relationship to that of relatives. I understand. Sorry for the trouble. I want to say it's not your fault, but she's your wife. Just remember that it affects your reputation. I understand. After that, we lived peacefully without meeting. There were a few occasions, like weddings or funerals, where we had to meet. Every time, I kept my distance, and she seemed to understand, which made me feel relieved. However, during the greetings for my wedding, I was reminded that people don't really change. When my husband and I were getting married, we had a family introduction dinner with my brother and sister-in-law, my parents, and my husband's parents. Even sister-in-law, I thought, would not say anything inappropriate in such a setting, but she messed up. By the way, what kind of work do you do? I run a humble hot dog stand. Oh, really? A chain? No, it's an independent shop. A hot dog stand. That's not even part-time work. Hey, come on. But it's a hot dog stand, right? Even if you were the manager of a chain store, it's still just okay. At that point, brother was pale, and our parents were staring at sister-in-law with disbelief. Are you going home now? Yes, I'm heading home. Come on. I wanted to hear more about the hot dogs. I was furious at sister-in-law's mocking tone. Look, I've been wanting to say this for a while. Can you please stop making fun of people in the way you speak? I'm not doing that. Yes, you are. You're overthinking it. But it seems I'm intruding, so I'll make my exit now. With that, she clicked her heels and left. I'm sorry. I apologize. She wasn't always like this. It's fine. I know my job is easy to make fun of, so I'm okay with it. I'm truly sorry. After that, there was a brief bout of apologies, but the meal without brother's family ended in a harmonious atmosphere. Even after the meal, I kept apologizing to my husband, but he seemed unfazed by his easygoing personality. When I went to brother's house alone to hand over the wedding invitations, sister-in-law said, "Oh, a hot dog vendor, but you're holding it in such a big venue? What does being a hot dog vendor have to do with it? Can you afford a dress change? If you have complaints, don't come." "I don't mind going, but really," she said, her tone mocking throughout. If this attitude continued, I was ready to tell both of them that they didn't have to come to the ceremony. But there were certain circumstances with brother, so I allowed them to attend on the condition that sister-in-law absolutely wouldn't approach me. And then, the wedding day arrived. The wedding was held in a relatively large venue. During the ceremony, sister-in-law was well behaved either due to having some sense of decency or because brother had scolded her. The ceremony ended without a hitch, the reception was mostly over, and we were in the midst of casual conversation when the incident happened. As a crowd gathered around the bride and groom's seats, a drunken sister-in-law approached. She gulped down the champagne in her hand and loudly proclaimed, "A hot dog vendor's wife is heading straight for a low-life existence, isn't she?" The room went dead silent at her words. Sister-in-law, oblivious to the recoiling of those around her, continued to disparage my husband. Then, from a little distance where he was chatting, brother flew over and yelled, "You! What are you saying?" "But it's true, isn't it? Being a hot dog vendor's wife is pretty low, right? She'll spend her life filthy in front of the kitchen, that's how it feels." "You! Just shut up! Why are you defending her? It's the truth, isn't it?" At that moment, my husband stood up and said, "It's over." "What?" Right then and there, brother turned to those around and offered a heartfelt apology. "My wife is really very sorry." "No, I understand your family's way of thinking well enough." "What? What is it? What's going on?" "Listen, the guests at this venue are all people who have invested in brother's company or are business partners." "What? What have you done?" "But why? Why would a hot dog stand owner invite such people? They're not your customers." "Osamand, you see, runs the hot dog stand as a hobby. He's an investor, far wealthier than us, and holds a much higher position. He's been investing in my company and even made contracts because my sister was getting married. You've ruined everything." "No way." Yes, my husband's true identity is that of an investor. He found success at a young age and started a hot dog stand as a hobby while continuing his investments. However, as he mostly entrusts others with the work, He has a large network but lives modestly, without any extravagant lifestyle. I was surprised when I found out he was an investor, but I admired his attitude of being wealthy yet living modestly and only spending money on what's really needed, which led me to marry him. After that, brother took sister-in-law away, and the event ended early, blaming a sudden illness in the bride's family. Of course, any after parties were canceled. Sister-in-law was summoned to a family meeting. The result was the apology at the beginning. As a result of the family meeting, it was the majority opinion that future dealings should be avoided if sister-in-law is around. Although they acknowledge brother's work, they think that trouble will eventually arise if sister-in-law is present. I agree with that. After all, it did become a big issue. Please forgive me. I apologize. I want to protect the company, and I can't go on with you. Divorce. You can ruin someone's wedding and still ask for forgiveness? Impossible. If you're here, I can never enter this house again. Divorce. I can't either. I can't associate with someone who thinks like that. The family's opinion was consistent. If sister-in-law is involved, it's impossible. If anyone had taken her side, they would have had to think about the future, but fortunately, everyone agreed. The compensation will be offset by the cancellation fees for the after-party and the post-party, as well as the return of the gifts. Your family has been notified. Pack up and leave by this weekend. What? Why do we have to pay for that? Of course you have to. We couldn't hold the after-party or the post-party, and we had to return the gifts because you ruined the wedding. We're all business owners, so the amount of money is significant. If you don't believe it, look at the recorded amount. Indeed, the amount returned was quite large. First, most of the attendees were business owners, and since many of them had invested in the husband's company, many were generous with their gifts. The total amount came to about $50,000. Honestly, I thought if we had this money, we could completely offset the wedding costs, but that's a secret. Sister-in-law was breaking down in tears after seeing the recorded amount, but it was none of my concern. You should have behaved yourself. But I didn't know. You shouldn't look down on people just because you didn't know. And you shouldn't judge people by their profession. But you said you were a hot dog vendor. I didn't say anything wrong. I was going to explain later, but you're the one who made a fuss. You didn't even tell me about the people at the venue. You were planning to be mean from the start. If you were truly involved in brother's work, you'd certainly recognize those faces. No need to tell you. Besides, if you were really friends with me, you'd know who was coming and what positions they hold. Yes, she only supported brother at first. After that, she seemed to focus on having lunches, dinners, practice sessions, and fun with the president's wives. So, she didn't know the faces of brother's business partners, nor did she know about her relationship with her husband. She didn't even seem to know what kind of work brother was doing now. If she had been working with brother, she should have known who the business partners were, and normally, she should have supported him as an entrepreneur's wife. But sister-in-law said, "I'll work hard on my relationships with women, so you work hard at your job. Entertaining the president's wives is part of the job." And she didn't seem to listen. Though he tried to tell her several times, sister-in-law maintained an attitude of, "I'm doing my best on my own." And it seemed like brother had given up. You're the one who cut off the friendship. I don't like your snide remarks. They belittle me. Besides, you don't normally say things to diminish the groom at someone's wedding. You keep it to a greeting. Wah! Sister-in-law was sobbing like a child, but it had nothing to do with me. Sorry, but can you take her away quickly? She's noisy. I apologize, but my daughter's parents are coming here to pick her up today. What's that? You never intended to forgive her in the first place. Of course not. Besides, I'm turning a blind eye to your overspending, so be grateful. Or shall I charge you the $80,000 for the overspending? It won't be offset. Inwardly, I thought, so she overspent beyond our means, huh? But I felt a little lighter knowing I didn't have to deal with sister-in-law anymore. After a while, sister-in-law's parents arrived and tried to apologize deeply at the entrance, but I said, I don't need that, and I don't intend to forgive her. Can you please take her back quickly? Sister-in-law's parents simply said, We're sorry, and took sister-in-law away. Later, I received a DM from sister-in-law on social media. I'll never forgive you for stealing my glamorous life as the CEO's wife. You're rich, so pay me $100,000 as compensation for ruining my life. Or, let me meet brother, and tell him that I've forgiven him, so we should remarry. I'll forgive you for ruining my life if you do that. And send me gifts for the birthdays and anniversaries you've missed. I'll forgive you if you send me some of the latest designer bags. The DM read. I quietly forwarded it to brother. From what I heard, sister-in-law seems to be living alone in a small apartment, having even been kicked out of her family home. Apparently, after the divorce, she'd written something like a contract, stating that if she ever tried to contact me or brother, she would have to pay a used-up fee, and since she broke that agreement, sister-in-law received a bill for $8 million. Sister-in-law tried to get her parents to pay, but sister-in-law's parents were a typical middle-class family. Even though she's their only daughter, it was not an amount they could casually pay. As a result, they told her to pay on her own, and that they knew nothing about it, and she was driven out of her family home, now pursued by brother for repayment. For a while, I kept an eye on sister-in-law's account, but whether she ran out of photos or her friends found out about the divorce, sister-in-law's social media account was gone before I knew it. As for me, I'm working happily with my husband. The work is tough since it's a new job, but chatting with my husband's investment clients and students after school makes it enjoyable. Since my husband isn't fond of luxury, we live a modest life together. The other day, I thought I saw sister-in-law. She looked completely different from her once neat appearance, wearing saggy old sweatpants and cheap slippers, carrying shopping bags. I thought, if only she had listened to what people told her, this wouldn't have happened, but I decided it was a waste of time to feel sorry for her and stopped thinking about it. Mom. Long time no see. How are you? After a long time, a call from Grace, my daughter living far away. What do you mean, how are you? You hardly ever get in touch. I wish you'd call more often. I'm sorry. That's why I'm calling now, right? And, sorry it's so sudden, but can I stay with you for about a week starting tomorrow? Grace got married 5 years ago and hasn't shown her face even once since the marriage greetings. Sometimes I send a message asking if she won't come home for a visit, but she says she can't find the time or can't get time off work, and she has stopped coming by. Now, my only daughter is coming home for the first time in 5 years. I was thrilled and immediately reported it to my husband, Joseph, when he came home. Then he said, Grace is something wrong? Something wrong? Do we need a reason for her to come visit after so long? No, we don't, but it's just so sudden, he muttered, tilting his head. The next day, Grace returned home, and we had our first family reunion in 5 years, the 3 of us. Just when I thought Grace was taking a bath, she seemed to be looking for something. Mom, can I have a week's worth of old newspapers? They make the closet warm. What? Sure, but old newspapers for a closet? I didn't quite understand what she meant, but thinking she might have started keeping a pet or something, I handed her the newspapers and gave Grace the closet she would use tonight. Thanks for going out of your way. It's been a while since I've slept in a closet. What? What do you mean? My name is Madison. I live with my husband, Joseph, who just recently turned 60. Joseph is very serious about his work. I take pride in supporting him as a housewife. He's not very talkative but always finishes the meals I cook and always says, "Thank you for the meal." It might seem ordinary to others, but I find comfort in this daily life. He has said that once he retires, he wants to take me traveling to various places as a thank you for the daily meals. And he wants to take our daughter along too. We have an only daughter, Grace. She got married 5 years ago and now lives far away, having not shown her face since the marriage greetings. Occasionally, I've sent messages asking if she will come home for a visit, but she says she can't find the time or can't get time off work, and she has become distant. Having lived under the same roof for so long, it feels like something is missing without her. I used to think we communicated well enough, and we were a close family, going shopping or watching movies together. Last year, I wanted to celebrate her turning 30, but she was too busy, and schedules didn't align, and another year has passed without doing so. Well, as long as she's doing well, that's what matters most. I didn't think that after living together for so long, we wouldn't end up not seeing each other for such a long time, so I often found myself sighing with loneliness. When will she finally have a break from being busy? But there's no use in just talking about it, so maybe I'll wax the floor today? I mutter to myself while dedicating myself to housework. Just a little longer until my husband retires. Once he has more free time, I plan to visit Grace. As I was changing my mood and polishing the floor, a call came in. Perhaps my thoughts reached her. It was a call from Grace. I was very surprised because Grace, who hardly ever shows her face or gets in touch, suddenly called. "Ah, Mom. Long time no see. How are you?" "What do you mean, how are you? You hardly ever get in touch. I wish you'd call more often." I'm sorry. That's why I'm calling now, right? And, sorry it's so sudden, but can I stay with you for about a week starting tomorrow? I was surprised and, of course, agreed happily. When my husband came home, I immediately told him about today's call. "Welcome home. You know, Grace called today and said she's coming here tomorrow." "Grace is? Is something wrong? Something wrong? Do we need a reason for her to come visit after so long?" "No, we don't, but it's just so sudden. She said she found some time, so let's ask her about it when she comes." "How many years has it been since she came home?" "Let's put some effort into cooking. I just waxed the floor today. I'll clean the house from top to bottom now." Good to be enthusiastic, but please don't overdo it and collapse. While saying that to me, my husband seemed happy as he watered the plants at the entrance, talking to them. And the next day. "It's been a while, both of you. I'll be in your care for a bit." "Nice to see you, Grace. Make yourself at home." Grace, whom we hadn't seen in a long time, seemed busy, maybe too busy, as she looked a bit worn out. I was a bit surprised to see Grace, who used to gather various cosmetics and care about her makeup, appear without any, but more than that, her hair seemed much more damaged than it was 5 years ago. And her simple attire, unlike her usual interest in fashion and various clothes, made me wonder if this was her way of becoming an adult. But I had to force myself to find words of acceptance. It seemed a bit too forced. Anyway, she made the effort to visit her parents' home despite being busy, so I wanted to let her relax as much as possible. For dinner, I prepared Grace's favorite dishes. "Mom, you never fail. Everything's delicious." Grace said it was delicious as she ate, but she left almost everything after just a bite or two. I went to prepare a bed for Grace while she was taking a bath, grabbing the freshly laundered bedding I had taken in the day before. Then, Grace, who had finished her bath without me noticing. "Mom," called out. Grace used to take long baths for beauty reasons, so I was preparing leisurely, which made me a bit puzzled. When I went towards where I heard her voice, Grace was in front of the closet. Wondering what she needed from the closet, it seemed like she was looking for something. Mom. Can I have a week's worth of old newspapers? They make the closet warm." Sure. Old newspapers for a closet? I didn't quite understand what she meant, thinking maybe she had started keeping a pet or something, but I gave them to her since she asked. Regaining my composure, I carried the bedding to Grace's room. "Thanks for going out of your way. It's been a while since I've slept in a closet," she said as she received them. I was surprised, but felt it was somehow inappropriate to ask if she had started keeping a pet. So, I just stood there, mouth shut. Grace seemed puzzled by my silence and tilted her head. "Mom, what's wrong?" Nothing." I could only reply before leaving the room. My husband, who had been watching the exchange from the shadows, said, "Hey, Madison. Don't you think there's something odd about Grace's behavior?" "Yes." I shared my concerns about Grace's bare face, her overly simple attire, and how she barely ate, or rather, seemed unable to eat much at dinner. It turned out my husband had the same worries, and he sat down, covering his face with both hands. After a while, he looked at me with determination, nodded firmly and said, "Let's gently ask Grace about it tomorrow. For now, let's just go to sleep." A bad feeling stirred in my chest, but I decided to trust my husband's words and went back to my room, trying not to think about anything and just sleep. When you want to clear your mind, take a deep breath. Before I knew it, I had fallen into a deep sleep. In the morning, Grace helped me prepare breakfast. "This really feels like our family's breakfast. Brings back memories." "Grace, you can sit down and wait for it to be ready too." Our trivial conversation brought a smile to my husband's face. The discomfort from the day before seemed like an unfounded worry, and I was tempted to believe everything was fine, reminded of our life before in this peaceful atmosphere. Comforted by the familiar scene, my husband went on to water the houseplants and do his morning exercises as part of his routine. Then, Grace suddenly shouted loud enough to drown out the music from my husband's radio exercises. "I'm sorry." Startled by the sudden outburst, my husband rushed to the kitchen. I stopped making soup and turned around to see Grace apologizing over and over, dousing her fried eggs in sauce and shaking slightly. Confused by the situation and seeing Grace trembling, I froze. But my husband approached her slowly and patted her gently. "It's okay." Then, taking the sauce from Grace's hand and applying it to the rest of the fried eggs, he said in a calm tone. Then, in a gentle tone, "Our family prefers sauce on our fried eggs, don't we? Is it different for Robert?" Grace seemed to remember something. "Robert gets really mad if there's no soy sauce," and said in a low voice. At that moment, I finally understood the unease I felt yesterday and why Grace had come home. I was ashamed of how happy I was about my daughter's return, as I could imagine her position in her household. It's likely that Grace's husband, Robert, does not treat her as an equal. Grace's attire was not simple but could be considered plain. She might not wear makeup because she's not allowed to buy cosmetics. Her damaged hair and worn-out appearance could be due to stress. I had thought Robert, Grace's husband and a colleague who is 4 years her senior, was a sociable young man with a refreshing smile when I met him, but I found myself clenching my fists in anger that I could not suppress. Then, my husband, Madison, gave me a look and said, "Let's have breakfast." He must have realized I was trembling with anger. He implied that making a scene now would only hurt Grace. My husband is truly wise. I quietly began setting the table with enough forks and glasses of water so we could start eating. Grace seemed a bit calmer, silently took her seat, and drank a little water. Deciding not to bring up the conversation for now, we finished breakfast as if nothing had happened and then sat back at the table to relax, at which point I tried to broach the subject with Grace without being too direct. Grace, don't worry about staying just a week. Feel free to stay here without any reservations. Grace glanced at her dad for a moment, then averted her gaze and whispered, "But Robert won't allow it." When I asked if she was worried about Robert, she hesitated before saying, "Not exactly, but," and looked down. Realizing that pursuing this topic might corner Grace made me feel uneasy. Yet, to protect her, it was clear we needed to hear her story to separate her from Robert. My husband, with a determined look, told Grace, "I'll do anything for your happiness, so lean on us without worry." Grace remained downcast for a while, but then lifted her head and began. "Actually," she prefaced before slowly starting to share the details of her married life. The conditions she described lightly surpassed our imagination in their deplorability. Hard to believe they could be inflicted by someone she had vowed to spend her life with. For starters, even before their marriage, unreasonable demands and verbal abuse were often hurled at her in the workplace, and once home, she was subjected to cruel words that denied her very personhood and simple verbal abuse. Furthermore, she was deprived of her closet and all means of communication with the outside world, including her mobile phone, were controlled by Robert, making it impossible for her to seek help. Despite both working, she was forcibly burdened with all the household chores. Robert next allowed her not to work, so she was forced to quit her job, and if she did something displeasing, he would immediately find fault and berate her. If Grace fell ill, she would be scolded instead for not being able to manage her health. Even her beloved fashion, makeup, and cosmetics were deemed a waste of money, and she was not allowed to purchase them satisfactorily. When I was shaking with anger to the point that veins were bulging on my forehead, Grace said, "But Robert is also struggling because he has no outlet for his stress," in a way that seemed to defend him. "That's irrelevant." My husband raised his voice in anger. "Let's take it easy." I responded by grabbing his arm in an attempt to calm him. My hand was trembling slightly. Seeing my husband shake with anger, just like me, at the attention focused on our daughter, helped me regain some calm. I couldn't understand why Grace would make such a statement in defense of him, despite being subjected to such unreasonable treatment, and I looked at my husband's expression. Perhaps sensing my intent or able to imagine Grace's feelings, my husband showed a sad expression and said, "Grace has always been a kind child, but..." He paused before adding, "I, as your parent, cannot forgive Robert, and I think you should leave him." It was rare for my usually reticent husband to make such a definitive statement, so his feelings were painfully clear to me. At the same time, I somewhat understood the reason for Grace's defense of Robert from my husband's pained expression. It must have been a form of self-defense, a way to protect herself. Believing that he was not at fault was the only way she could protect herself, perhaps because she was too traumatized to make a sound judgment. The reality that our daughter had been so badly hurt was thrust upon us, leaving us overwhelmed with frustration and helplessness, tears unstoppable. And the anger towards Robert, who could hurt his wife so much and carry on as if nothing happened, made us tense with rage. We are not heartless parents who could stay silent after seeing our daughter hurt like this. She is our daughter, whom we have cherished and loved dearly. A serious, personable, and kind daughter, liked by everyone. We all believe such a person should never have to suffer harm from anyone. We will protect Grace and ensure she divorces Robert to reclaim the life she deserves. Because there are limits to what a layman can do, We need to find a trustworthy lawyer. Even after a week had passed, we kept Grace at our home. Abusive messages asking why she was not at home were sent to her multiple times by Robert, so we had Grace turn off her mobile phone. Likely, he was managing the GPS too. His messages made it seem like he knew she was at our house, her family home, but thankfully, there was no sign of him showing up in person. Then, we hired a wise lawyer with good online reviews to ensure Grace's divorce proceedings went smoothly and started gathering evidence. At first, Robert flatly refused to divorce, but he quieted down after testimonies were obtained from coworkers about the verbal abuse and unreasonable demands Grace faced while still employed. Moreover, testimonies from neighbors about hearing Robert shouting at Grace and finding recorded calls between Grace and him forced him to consent to the divorce. It seems he was the type to make enemies even among those around him. It's clear that no matter how much one tries to improve their outward behavior, it cannot fully cover their actions. But even with the divorce confirmed, we cannot be at ease. Considering Robert's nature, it's unlikely he will remain quiet. Taking the lawyer's advice to use the law's full force, we decided to ask Grace if she would be willing to file a lawsuit. My true desire is to use the full force of the law to ensure that our daughter never has to face him again, but I wonder what Grace's feelings on the matter were. We must not forget that our actions were taken not for revenge against Robert, but solely to protect Grace. Overstepping what she desires would be wrong and not what we want. After some thought, Grace shared, "I don't want to go back to that life, and I never want to see Robert again." Therefore, we decided to do everything we could, which included seeking a restraining order through the courts. Surprisingly, the restraining order was easily granted, and Robert was ordered to pay a significant amount of compensation. The crime of trampling on human dignity was recognized as grave, and it felt like a slight weight was lifted from our hearts. Grace, a bit more spirited now, understood how far from normal her situation had been and had secretly confided the real circumstances, which she couldn't share with her parents, to the lawyer who had been helping her. Though usually bound by confidentiality, this time the lawyer informed us, suggesting we take care of it as a family or, if necessary, introduce her to a specialist, that before marrying, Grace had a good relationship with Robert as colleagues. They were seen as a perfect couple by those around them, carrying a good image. However, as time passed, only Grace's honesty, work ethic, and achievements were recognized. And she began to outpace Robert in the company. Robert, though sociable, had a high pride and often blamed others when things didn't go well, which meant he didn't receive favorable evaluations. The gap between Grace and him gradually widened, and it was accepted with a sense of inevitability by those around them. There was talk among peers about whether Grace would leave Robert or if Robert should be supported by Grace, which eventually reached Robert's ears. From that point, Robert began to take out his jealousy and irritation on Grace, effectively controlling her social interactions and making it impossible for her to leave. After she tried to break it off once, his escalation prevented any separation, leading Grace to think she might just have to endure it. Robert's jealousy of Grace, who was well regarded by her peers, did not cease, and he began to verbally abuse her within the company, often witnessed by colleagues. However, this was never brought to light, and Grace, under Robert's control, had no one she could turn to for advice. Upon marrying, she was forced to quit her job. Grace intended to support the household finances through dual incomes, and initially, Robert agreed. However, once married, he changed his attitude. As a housewife, Grace found herself restricted in every aspect. Firstly, financially. Due to unreasonable demands to reduce spending, she was deprived of her closet, and all communication devices, including her mobile phone, were controlled by Robert to cut costs. There were also restrictions on going out, and she could no longer take care of her appearance, resulting in damaged hair and skin. Women tend to improve their mood by doing their hair, dressing fashionably, applying makeup, and engaging in such recreational activities, but it seems all of these were taken away by Robert. Seeing Grace living a restricted life made Robert mistakenly believe he had the upper hand, leading to an escalation in his unreasonable verbal abuse and demands. It's a disturbing story. Hearing this from the lawyer, I've often wanted to scold my past self for not seeing through such a cowardly man. It became clear that Grace, having had her means of communication, including her mobile phone, taken away and her outings restricted, struggled to contact us. Certainly, if she couldn't use her mobile phone except in front of Robert, she couldn't ask for help. We regret not actively reaching out to Grace instead of waiting for her to contact us, such as visiting her or stopping by when we were out and about. To avoid Robert's verbal abuse and unreasonable demands, Grace was forced to appease him, likely leading her to suppress her own feelings and act against her will. The only silver lining was when Robert left Grace's mobile phone at home during a long business trip, allowing Grace a chance to contact us. Whether it was accidental or intentional, without it, Grace might not have reached out to us. We're grateful Grace found the courage to ask for our help, and that we noticed the changes in our daughter. I was glad we could be of assistance. Initially, when we heard everything from Grace, we were filled with regret for not noticing her situation sooner, but now, we're genuinely relieved to see Grace smiling and living with us. We didn't lose our daughter, after all. Currently, Grace spends her days with us. She occasionally helps my husband with his gardening hobby, sweating together. Though my husband planned to get into it more seriously after retirement, with Grace's help, we might consider expanding it sooner. I've been entertaining the idea of eventually selling our produce at markets or supermarkets, though it's just my wishful thinking, but it would be a joy if that day comes. In any case, I'm glad we could bring back Grace's smile. We haven't returned to joking around or nagging each other like before, but I'm looking forward to gradually seeing the old Grace return.